All right, we're live. Matthew Maruca, welcome to the future of fitness, my friend.
Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate it. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful Friday morning, both in San Diego and Whitefish, Montana. So we're gonna use a little bit of it to record a podcast and then go enjoy the day, I would imagine. But
Yes,
uh,
absolutely.
I'm, I've been looking forward to this for a while. I know we've had a kind of reschedule a few times due to a lot of different things, but I just find you to be an interesting person. I like the brand of Raw Optics. I use your night glasses, and everyone I've suggested it to so far seems to be a big fan. And even, the team at Workout, Ramen, I don't think he minds me saying the chief financial officer of that company was always having a lot of problem. He said by the end of the day, his eyes were tired. He had a headache almost every day, right? By 1 or 2 p.m. And you guys allowed us to try out some of the product. And he immediately, within a day or two, was telling me unprompted, how much his days were improved now. He had more energy. He could stare. He could still look at the screen in the afternoon, and overall just felt much better. So there's definitely a lot to it. We're going to get into of course the science of what it is today, but something I haven't covered here. So it's good to have you. And I'll stop talking for now. And you have an interesting backstory, Matthew. So maybe we can start there. Tell us how you got to be the founder and CEO of Raw Optics, and then we'll see where that goes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it, Eric. So as far as the background and how I got into the company, I started the company when I was 18 years old. I had just finished high school, and what preceded that was quite a few years of trying to improve my health. That was at least my idea, using whatever I could find on the internet. And before that, I had tried Western medicine. I had gone to regular Western doctors, and they had prescribed me for allergies I was having, Zyrtec, for gut issues I was having, Tums, and for headaches, Advil, and so on. So I kind of lost faith in that. And even my mother, thankfully, she was supporting me all the way. She had taken me to a naturopathic doctor, which was pretty cool, but nonetheless didn't fully have the effect that I needed. I was still having these symptoms, the gut issues, the allergies, the headaches. And by the time I got into high school, I started getting pretty bad breakouts of acne, as many high schoolers do. But I really thought there must be something I can do about this. And I had this idea that maybe I could actually change my diet, which to me seemed really far out at the time. But I just thought maybe I could use food to heal this. And so there was actually a little more to it. Actually had I had this idea like maybe my gut was damaged. I don't know where that came from, to be honest, but because I was eating greasy foods and then I was getting these breakouts, and I was like, somehow maybe maybe there's the barrier is just not working. The separation process of just taking everything apart and it's not working, and somehow this grease is coming to my skin and clogging my pores and whatnot. Again, I actually don't know if that's actually based in fact still or not. I haven't check that one out. But anyway, it was funny that when I started reading about these diets, my skin issues did get significantly better. But the other thing was that I started reading about all this evidence that we could change other issues in our health with food. Like, for example, the allergies that and the headaches and all this other stuff, gut issues that I thought were just genetic. In particular, allergies I thought were genetic. The gut issues I didn't really have a clue. Headaches, I just thought it was normal. And yeah, so I just did every version of this diet I could find. At the beginning. It was called the paleo diet, still is. And I went really deep into that. I became pretty obsessive because I was at this point as a teenager where I had like self-diagnosed something's wrong with me and I can fix it with my diet, was what I believed. I don't really think that's true anymore, that diet's as big of a deal as most people think it is. I don't agree. But anyway, tried all these diets, ended up struggling tremendously because I had really fixed in my mind that I could completely heal myself with food alone. And so I became like pretty orthorexic about every little thing I would eat, as many
Mm.
people are today in the diet world, thinking that the food is the actual most important thing for their health. And it ended up becoming pretty unhealthy. And I ended up doing stricter and stricter versions of the paleo diet called the autoimmune protocol paleo diet, and then the GAPS diet, which are elimination diets. And the idea behind elimination diets is that you'll remove foods that irritate the gut lining and activate the immune system. And by doing that, you'll give the body the ability to heal itself without being attacked, essentially, or without being overstimulated. Now, what I didn't know then and I know now is that they don't talk about or even ask about at all what the force is that's responsible for healing in the human body or in any living organism for that matter. And there's an assumption that it just works. And what I found in my experience was that no matter which elimination diet I did or how strictly I did it, I felt bad. Generally, I felt worse as I was more restrictive on my diet, and I didn't get better. I actually felt worse. And then I would end up binge eating, or I should say eating something that was technically not allowed on the diet, and then like going off the rails and eating whatever I wanted, because the whole idea of these diets is if you make one tiny mistake, it's basically as bad as if you eat whatever you want for a week, because you have to start from ground zero again based on your immune system activation. So it wasn't really, again, psychologically healthy. So I just ended up I was in this kind of like loop for many, many months, just like obsessing about exactly everything I was eating, feeling like I'd give up, I'm just going to break this, and then just going to the rails. And it was like a pretty unhealthy relationship with food. And then anyway, thankfully, there was some kind of light at the end of the tunnel at that point. I learned about this research from a blogger in the paleo space, but not exactly, who was actually basically saying to people, hey, listen, are you still struggling with health issues, regardless of which diet you've tried and how strict you've been? I'm like, well, that sounds kind of interesting. And the idea was, well, hey, it could be because there are other factors that affect your health besides just food, actually, that are more important than food. And it turns out, for example, your mitochondria, the cellular engines that process our food, could actually be damaged because of different factors besides food. For example, excess exposure to electromagnetic fields, like all the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and 5G, has negative effects on our mitochondria. Even more simply, artificial light at night. You get blue light at night from the modern light bulbs and screens, tricks the brain into thinking it's still day. The brain makes less melatonin, the cells repair less, and the mitochondria in particular don't get the full restoration they need when we're sleeping. And so the body's living in a state of kind of chronic reduced function, which you could basically liken to chronic sleep deprivation on a small scale, but over time it compounds, and people think, oh, I'm just a little tired, it's not a big deal, but over time that can be an issue. So anyway, that was fascinating, and it led me to all of these books that I started reading from this source that this source had recommended. All these books about biology and quantum biology and biophysics, and I started reading all these books, and it just made sense to me that life is so much more complex than just this simple chemical system where you put food in and you get health out or disease. Like, there's so many factors that influence how well our cells function. For example, you could be eating a perfect diet, but if your cells are ridden with mercury, for example, or glyphosate from Roundup, then it doesn't really matter what you eat. It can make it worse or it can make it a little better. But if you're ultimately ridden with toxins, it doesn't really matter, because it's separate from the issue. You're going to have health issues because of this. You could make your diet perfect, but still have issues because it's a separate thing. And so the mitochondrial dysfunction idea was something very similar. And it turns out that mitochondrial dysfunction underpins almost every chronic disease, whereas they're not actually genetic. And they know that now. It's all epigenetics. We're not, humans have survived through millions and millions, maybe billions of years of evolution, and our genes are really good. And so everybody says, well, oh, heart disease runs in my family, and heart disease runs in my family, and obesity runs in my family, and bad vision runs in my family, and Alzheimer's runs in my family. It's like, well, it runs in everybody's family because everybody's getting that and everybody's dying of it. It's not genetic. It's a population epidemic, essentially. And that means it's an environmental factor causing this. Like, that's the basis of it. Like, for example, vision problems, which are, I think, 50% of people or more now, would have been selected out very quickly in evolution. So it's not a gene for that. It's a failure of our genes to function properly. And that's energy production, and the retina consumes practically more energy than any part of the body. And therefore, it would be a place you would expect to have issues in this modern world. The brain also and the heart are two of the highest energy consuming tissues. And that's why the two killers today, the two top killers, are Alzheimer's disease and heart disease, cardiovascular disease, because these systems require lots of energy to function. We're destroying our body's ability to produce energy properly. And so anyway, now I'm going on quite a bit of a
I like
discourse
it.
here, but just to wrap this up, I got into the company because I learned about all this information, and I was particularly overzealous and overconfident maybe in 2017, but enough to, thankfully, the information I knew about was directionally accurate. So I think, it's to be cocky or overconfident isn't ideal, but if the information you have is at least directionally accurate, I think maybe it's forgivable. So I had learned this information. I thought it was the be all end all of everything about how light is so important. I started this company making blue light protection eyewear because there was nothing available that both blocked the right wavelengths of light and looked good and was high quality and stylish. Nothing. There was no, and today there are still very few other options besides our products as far as like really high quality, great looking styles plus the right protection. I can only think of one other company in the space that's doing it what I would consider decently well. And so I started that company, and it just was more for the niche community that I was a part of, these so-called quantum health people who were into this, all this stuff about mitochondria and getting the sunrise and sunbathing and blocking all the EMFs. And most people would think are totally crazy, but there was some foundation, some truth to that information. Now, looking back, myself included, I would say that a lot of the people, both in this kind of world and the diet worlds, as you probably have experienced, get a little overzealous, a little over the top. But and I've come to think more and more, as I mentioned to you before we hit record, is that I think the mental aspect, the psychological aspect, is probably bigger than anything else today. But anyway, that's how I got into running the business.
Yeah, that's a great backstory, Matthew. I appreciate it. And
Thanks, man.
I was thinking, I was resonating with it because when I started my fitness career journey, it was in CrossFit, and CrossFit led to paleo, right? And because it worked for me and a handful of people that I was working with and family members, I was 100%, I was very cocky. Like, all I need is CrossFit and paleo, and I can solve most of the world's problems. I was convinced,
You and
right?
me both.
And then you start doing a little bit of research, and then that leads to more research, and then you realize, oh my God, I know nothing. There's so much I need to learn. And that's when it really starts. That's when the process really starts. So I think that initial phase of being, you mentioned it, maybe cocky or overly confident or maybe naive in some points is critical when you're developing something like this as a person and as a professional. So I can definitely resonate with that. It's really interesting. And so tell me about the company. Like, at what point did this actually become a business? Like, what was the first iteration of the product? You kind of like scratched your own itch per se. Like, when did it actually go from, okay, I'm just trying to solve my own issues here, to, okay, I think I have a business, man.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a great story. I don't share it often. I appreciate you asking. I was 16 in high school, and I was in the thick of my diet obsessive and just learning about light and mitochondria period in my life. And so for me, I'm 20. I just turned 24, so this is 8 years ago now, 9 years ago. But as much as I was pretty immature then, I would say I was very much becoming an adult as far as the sort of level of responsibility I was taking for my own health. I wasn't an adult by any stretch yet, but I was definitely taking on certain responsibilities that someone would usually look at much later in their life, if ever. So anyway, I went on a foreign exchange program because I didn't really feel like I fit in. So I had seen this opportunity one day in class to go on a foreign exchange program, and I applied and I got in, and I was super stoked. I was like, this is going to be the coolest thing ever. I don't know if I've ever been as excited about anything. And I basically was placed in, so it was this kind of government sponsored exchange program for high school students for a year. So your a
Cool.
full year of high school, you'd be abroad. And it was to countries with significant Muslim populations that were safe for American students. And they sent like 62 or some American students abroad, and they would bring in like 1,000 students from the Middle East and all this to live in the States, actually. But they'd started sending some Americans overseas to these countries, and some were like Ghana, Thailand, India.
Hmm.
I went to Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is a country in the former Yugoslavia, just inland and south of Croatia, which kind of wraps around Bosnia like a boomerang. It's kind of like a triangular shape, heart shaped country almost. And it's to the west of Serbia. So just all north of Greece and Macedonia there. and
Cool.
south of Hungary and Poland, I guess, above that. But anyway, so I went over to this on this exchange program, and it was really cool because I haven't told this story in ages. I don't know if ever on a podcast, but basically, I had all this information about how basically if we spent more time in the sun and ate healthier food, like we would be healthier. And then I literally got to go do like a population study of my own, so to speak, going over to a foreign country where the people are living back like 30 years in the past. They had cell phones and all this stuff. They had Wi-Fi, like they're relatively modern, but the energy of the place was like 20, 30 years in the past. The way people think, but also like the way that they spent so much time outdoors, even in the winter, walking. It was a walking city. Everybody walked everywhere. It's a city called Banja Luka, the second largest city in Bosnia, the largest city, the capital, Sarajevo. It was, 200,000 people or so, and just beautiful city. Unbelievable picturesque nature in southeastern Europe, like nestled in hills and rivers and countryside. Anyway, and these people are like out at cafes all spring and all summer. In fact, the part of the issue I think people would say is that like there's no economy because like 40% of the population is unemployed and just sits and drinks coffee all day because there's not a lot of like hope. Or at least a lot of the generation I was in school with didn't have a lot of hope about the future of their country, just given the fact that it was war torn from 20 years prior or 25 years prior. So anyway, I saw such differences in how healthy the people were. It was crazy. Like the women, like the girls, even 16 years old were just like, and I was that age at the time, 16, 17, like they looked like really mature and healthy women, like physically. They looked really good. And I was like, whoa, this is I've never seen this in the United States at all. Right. And this isn't just, again, it's not just genetic. Like this is population effects on human health, obviously, to me at least. Then the like even the guys, like being 16 to 18 years old, usually guys mature a little bit later than women, but like the men were just like properly fit and healthy looking. And yeah, like the people I was with were mostly Serbs. So Serbs definitely have this kind of genetic leaning to look super masculine compared to your average person. But like I've seen the same now that I've traveled over the world. It's often the case in regardless of the country and the exact genetics they have, like any country to me where they are living a healthier, more outdoor, natural lifestyle, eating healthier food, spending more time sitting outside, walking outside. The people, first of all, the most obvious thing is they have like virtually no obesity in Europe compared to the United States. I mean, it's astounding. And the fact that people aren't like screaming from the rooftops, demanding answers as to why people in the US are so obese and like why we're basically being poisoned like farm cattle, like factory farm cattle, is kind of shocking. But in the same way, if you have a lot less obese people, that bell curve and statistics where you have like certain amount of people in the middle and then certain amount of people really overweight and really underweight, but like the average is in a certain healthy range. That whole range in Europe and other cultures is like just even now, even with all the toxic artificial light, it's just shifted over to like less sickness and more health. So in other words, like there's many, many more people who are robustly healthy and fewer people. Like as soon as you shift that whole bell curve over just a little bit out of the disease and obesity, you get a lot more healthy people, right? And and like the level of radiance of health, not to say we don't have people like that in the States, that 60-year-old down the road who's just radiant and vibrant. Everybody sees that here and there, I would think. But in Europe, it's just like, whoa, there's like these 60, 70-year-old people who are just like out having a glass of wine or like whatever, and they're just doing great. So anyway, that was something that was really interesting for me to observe. I was like, this is interesting, what's going on? And I was there for a year. So anyway, the reason I brought that up to your question about the business, actually, it's just a interesting and relevant digression. So for me and for the listener, I would say that was the kind of stuff I was thinking about. And I believed, as we said about the paleo and this, then I believed that what I found was like the holy grail. First, I thought paleo was it. And then I realized that was wrong. And then I thought the stuff about light and mitochondria was it. And I say thought because it's no longer exactly what I believe. And I'd love to get into that, but I still believe there's a very important significance. It's just not the end. It's just not the be all end all. And I believe this light stuff's way more important than food and diet still, for the most part, right? Or at least worth noting, at least at that same level, if not a little bit more. So as far as how did the business come about, I was communicating with people in this kind of niche community that I mentioned where I had started the business. But before I started the business, this was about 2 years prior, about just on the Facebook groups. And I had one guy reach out to me who is 2 years older, maybe 3 years older. He grew up in Napa Valley. Family had a winery and a resort and something like that in Calistoga, I believe. And
Nice.
so like cool guy, was like going to go play football for Princeton. Like he was an amazing football player, American football player. But he got into health and startups and all this stuff and kind of like veered off that path, to like much to the surprise, I think, of his family and people who that was like he was like that guy, like the quarterback, the jock, but also like a freaking genius. And so he had been in this community and started sending me, he's like, dude, I think you should read these books. Like, I've kind of feel like, he's a couple of years ahead of me. And, when you're younger, you feel like that age difference is a big deal. And so I was like, oh, I got to take this guy's advice. And so I started reading these startup books. I read 4 books that were really, really valuable. One was The 4-Hour Workweek from Tim Ferriss, which basically told me that there's this possibility that I wasn't really aware of, but he explained it very nicely. And even in the early 2000s when he wrote that, or mid 2000s or whatever, that you could basically make money online, work from everywhere, and join what he called the new rich, which is people who they're not necessarily billionaires, but they have time freedom and location freedom. And I thought that was really cool. And so it opened my mind to that. And he talked about the idea of starting a muse, like just an idea, even if you already have if you're in school, or you're like I was in high school, or you have a job, just starting your muse. It's your project on the side. And so I started thinking like, okay, I called it the thing. Like there's a thing I'm looking for. I don't know what it is, but I was just kind of like attached to this idea and keeping it alive. And then I read the book, 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, which the big takeaway that I still remember from that was just that the hardest part of doing anything in business and so on is going from 0 to 1. So going from nothing to something, scaling something's easier. But anyway, I thought that's interesting. I didn't invent blue blocking glasses, but I would say my version of 0 to 1 is something like taking this idea that nobody's really familiar with in the mainstream and making it mainstream. Once it goes like we get more mainstream, we can scale a lot, but it's like this idea of making it relatable for people, I would say, is some aspect of what we're doing. Then there's a book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, from, I think it was Ben Horowitz, which says basically everything in the title. Like there aren't necessarily easy answers. You have to be willing to think out of the box. And that's the one I remember the least, but I do believe it was still valuable. And I think this could be amazing for anybody who's starting a company or wants some valuable resources. And then the roadmap, the maybe the best book of all, but they were all critical, was called The Lean Startup. And The Lean Startup by a guy named Eric Ries. And he basically talks about how it sounds like looks like you're familiar with the book by your gestures, but basically for the listener who's not familiar, it's a really great book. And it basically talks about a different model of running a startup, what he calls the lean startup, as opposed to the traditional startup where you have a business plan and you take on an investment and you build a team and you put all these resources into executing this plan. And most of those just fail and waste a bunch of money. But like I was saying earlier offline, when we talked about the employee size of a company, people judge that. It's like, that's the old model. That's like the people who think you need to go to college to be smart would basically judge, a company's success based on the number of employees. That's the opposite of the model today of how it actually is, in my opinion. But anyway, so in the book, he explains how in the manufacturing industry, which he went into and studied after his startup miserably failed and lost millions of dollars. They built all these custom features and all this stuff, millions of dollars, tons of employees, lost all this fundraising money. And they found out that nobody even wanted the core product, much less all the features that they had built and spent years developing, right? So he went and evaluated Toyota and saw that they have this thing called lean manufacturing. And it's where they basically, instead of producing like hundreds of thousands of replacement parts or millions of replacement parts for all their vehicles on the road, they basically have designed really intelligent machinery, which can produce much smaller amounts for a very cost efficient price, in a cost efficient way. They can produce much smaller amounts. And so their system's kind of like tracking real-time data of how many bumpers are being replaced at the local distributor. And that's all feeding up to the main factories. And so you take a bumper from the local place and then it sends a bump in the system. Okay, we need one at the regional, and then we need another one from the North American warehouse. And then we need another one from the factory in Japan. And it's like these numbers are more real time. So in other words, they don't make way more than they need. It's much more real time. It's more lean. And so in the same way, you could start a startup where you're not doing all this fundraising and nothing wrong with fundraising if you have a great idea and you're going to execute it. But A lot of the time businesses just don't need that. Like we didn't need that. What I did, and I followed these principles, and I didn't have money anyway, so it was like fine, was I had this hypothesis. Like it's the scientific method of business, right? So it's basically you have a hypothesis, you devise an experiment to try to disprove your hypothesis. You have certain criteria you're measuring for, the variables and everything you're looking at. Devise the experiment, run the experiment, and then this is just the scientific method. And then you basically evaluate your results and see if you disproved your hypothesis or if you should develop a new experiment to try to disprove your hypothesis a different way. And if you can't disprove the hypothesis, it's likely that maybe there's a theory or a law that's there. And so anyway, he called it the build, measure, learn feedback loop. So you build an experiment, you measure with preset criteria. So, because if you don't have something preset that you're going to measure for, you're just going to adjust and you're not really going to have anything solid and tangible because you'll cherry pick the data to support what you want to believe, right? And then you learn, and he has this term, you pivot or you persevere. So if you persevere, it's like, I'm going with this is working. Or pivot, it's like, we need to adjust a little bit. Usually there's a degree of both, sticking with one part, losing another. So this is a bit the long story, but again, I hope it's valuable for people. So I came back from my year abroad when I had read these books. That's why I mentioned that. I was over there just reading, thinking a lot, probably thinking way too much. I was kind of driving myself insane, actually, with the amount of thinking I was doing about like what I was going to do with my life when I was 16. And so, but it worked out in some respects. I mean, it's working out, I would say. Anyway, I came back and I had my senior year and oh my gosh, I was so ready to like drop out of high school. It was so bad. I was like, what the heck am I doing sitting in like a box with like artificial light and EMF, Wi-Fi? Like there was a time when I was literally like about to get on a plane and fly to San Francisco to meet with this friend of mine and like live on a couch in San Francisco and like, start a startup of some kind. Like I'm almost, right. It's funny. I'm shocked I didn't actually end up doing that. It would have been hilarious. My dad probably would have excommunicated me, but anyway, I'm just joking. He supports me, but basically, it was an interesting time. So I finished high school, thankfully, and had a lot of great connections. But as soon as it finished, I had all these ideas. I was like, well, maybe I'll be a light coach, a health coach about the stuff I've been learning about light, right? Because that's what a lot of people, everybody's a coach now. Nothing really wrong with coaches, but like, I think a lot of people, myself, I would have very much been in this camp, is like people are not necessarily certified to teach. Like they haven't necessarily done the growth. And it's almost like the coaching process is like their own therapy process, like with other people paying them. It's interesting, but that's a whole different conversation. But anyway, one I imagine you're somewhat familiar with. So, being in the training and fitness industry, then I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll make light bulbs, which we're actually working on finally, years later. But so like a healthy light bulb, but it seemed kind of obscure. It didn't really click. I was on like Alibaba and looking at what I could find. And then finally, I was landscaping. I was planning to take a gap year. So I was doing landscaping over the summer and throughout the year. I was as young as I can remember, I would like leaf rake in the fall, snow shovel in the winter, and make some money, $200 to my name. And I was preparing for a gap year. So I'll close off the story of how the business started, because this is great to me. So I hope it's great to you. So basically I was landscaping, making money, and I had all this information in my head, what I believe to be like the cure for cancer. That's way, way beyond. I'm like, okay, I already thought the paleo diet was a big deal. I've now discovered, imagine the hubris when you're like, oh, I've discovered something that's way beyond the paleo diet. I didn't like, it was funny. You said, you'll research and you realize how much you don't know. For me, it was almost the opposite. It was like, I learned more and I was like, now I know everything for sure. I got it all figured out, which was not the case, but I thought it. And so I was pushing a lawnmower every day and digging holes and stuff. And I loved that work. I was like shirtless half the time out in the sun, listening to podcasts. So it was a great job and I loved it. But I was sitting here thinking like, I'm much more intelligent than $20 an hour. And $20 an hour was pretty good for a high schooler at that time in 2017. But it was like, I know more than this. Like I thought I had the cure to cancer and all this stuff. And to some extent, I still believe that is true. That information is the foundation for a new model of health. And so I remember listening to a podcast, and this is how simply it came about. I didn't really force it, right? And maybe this is a lesson for people, myself included, of how sometimes we don't have to try to force things, but just following the clues more. So I was listening to a podcast of this main doctor who had kind of connected all these dots for me. he was being interviewed by a guy named Luke Story. Maybe you've heard of Luke Story. He's a great lifestyle podcaster out of LA. He has a show called The Lifestylist. He's interviewed many of the top health and wellness people and other psychology people and all sorts of things. So anyway, celebrities and whatnot. Really great guy. He's now a friend. So anyway, I was just listening to his podcast because my doctor who I followed was on that show. I wouldn't listen to any podcast in particular. I would just listen to whichever podcast that this guy went on to. Right. And then this host who I was resonating with, he had some great energy, seemed like a great guy, on that ad spot in the middle of the podcast. You know, they have all the ads now and since forever. He advertised this event he was going to be putting on in New York City. Just a little talk to maybe 20 or 30 people at this beauty parlor. Right. His brand was much smaller at the time. He was a much bigger podcasting brand now. But I was like, I want to be on this guy's podcast, because I knew in that moment as I was listening, I was like, I know that I can explain the science that this doctor is explaining, because I've studied it for over 2 years now in detail. It was basically all I focused on. I can explain this in a way that this podcaster's audience would resonate with and relate to and be able to apply much more effectively and easily. And so this was my theory, my hypothesis, right? So I devised the experiment, drive up to New York. It's only 2 hours. The guy's coming all the way from LA, so he's a lot closer to me here than he is on the other side of the country. So I might as well go pitch him there. Went up with a friend of mine who was into this stuff as well. Had our custom-made blue light blocking glasses, because we were wearing these super ugly, cheap safety goggle blue blocking glasses, which were the only thing at the time that really blocked the right wavelengths of light, other than going and having them custom made for like $400 or $500 by an optician. Eventually we found a way to have them custom made a little less expensive, which we did. And so my friend and I had these cool custom made glasses. So we show up at this guy's little talk, 20 or 30 people there, chat and kind of stand out on the sidewalk with him for an hour or so, talking after the fact. And he was really friendly and really open. And he asked us first, like, where'd you get those glasses? And we're like, oh, we'll set you up with the company. And then so I asked, it's an interesting energetic thing, but he asked a favor of us, of something like that. And I asked a favor of him, like, hey, can I be on your podcast? Can you give me a chance? Basically, I bet I could do this. Well, the short version of that much longer story there on the podcast is that it didn't come out for 6 or 7 months. After that, I had already gone on this gap year. I was saving my money for travel all around Europe. It came out in April or so of 2018, but it became his number one most downloaded podcast of all time. It held that number one for over a year. And this guy is interviewed, I'm talking like New York Times bestselling authors, like all the big people in the health and wellness space. He's interviewed all of them, and many he had interviewed at that point already. So it was like a shock that his youngest, least known guest, and by far the longest episode, was the number one download. It just struck a chord. So my hypothesis was not disproven, at least, right? So that was really cool. And that led to all sorts of exposure, actually, like kicking the business off. Actually, that podcast led to now a good friend of mine, but one of the top music producers in history, really, in our generation, out in California, just reaching out to me, being like, hey, this is really cool stuff. Do you want to come out and connect? And I started connecting with him and all sorts of cool people out there. But anyway, that same night, before the podcast request, he had asked about the glasses and where we got them. And I was like, I remember thinking when some company tried to make the glasses cool and they failed, the quality didn't end up being good. They did a whole Kickstarter thing, right? Perfect example of not the lean startup, whole Kickstarter campaign. Although it's a little better than taking somebody else's money, to at least take your customers' money. But anyway, so that's a little more, again, lean. But anyway, this company kind of failed. And so I remember thinking when I saw that Kickstarter thing, I was like, finally, somebody's going to do the glasses correctly. So I because I would never want to do that myself. I just remember thinking that very clearly. Like, I would never want to make glasses. And so anyway, sure enough, when I'm trying to connect this guy, Luke, the podcaster, with this company that can do this custom tinting for a reasonable price, it was a huge pain. It was really inconvenient. It wasn't their core business. It was like a sort of one-off thing they would do as a favor for customers with this really specific need. And you had to go buy your own frame anyway and get the right lenses cut and just send the lenses. You wouldn't even send them the frame. They didn't want a frame. They didn't want to have to take them. They literally, you send them the lenses, the raw lenses, they tint them, send them back, and your optician would have to put the lenses back in. Now it's easy to put the lenses in and out of your own frame. Like, I mean, for anybody listening to the video, like, I learned how to do this because I did it all day. I made glasses. But if you don't know what to do, then you'll think you'll break it, right? You want an optician to do it. So anyway, I had seen an article right around that period this is way long, but let's just go with it. So I had seen an article around this period of how to make your own blue blocking glasses, how to do this tinting yourself. You buy a hot plate, you buy a chemistry beaker, you buy the tint bottle, like literally a chemistry hot plate. Like you could use an electric stove. It'd probably do the same thing, but the hot plate was a little more adjustable. And then you basically get the water to boiling in a glass chemistry beaker. And then you'd have the tint mixture in there. So it was water and tint. And then you would dip the lenses in with a lens holder, a device just for holding two pairs, like a pair of lenses. You'd keep them in there for 10, 20 minutes, something like that. And then you test the lenses with a meter that we bought to make sure we tested all our lenses to ensure that they had the right density of the tint, which meant that they would be having the right protective properties of that tint. And so that's what we did. And that was the article. And then I thought, well, you know what? Let me just do that for this guy. And then it just clicked. It became obvious in that moment. I was like, wait a minute. I could do this for him. I could do this for the entire community. And so I just devised the experiment. I created a Google form. People had to fill out the Google form with their name, their information. I gave them exact instructions on which website to send to go buy frames from. So it was a custom tinting service in the beginning. I called it Matt's Custom Blue Blockers. People could pick a website or pick the frame they wanted from certain websites, make sure they got the lenses included in the frames, but without this anti-reflective coatings that would block our tint from getting into the lens. And so, check the box, no anti-reflective coating, whatever, order it to this address, to my house, my garage. And if once they'd confirm that they've already sent payment through PayPal on the Google form, they checked the box and I had instructions which address to send to, how much money, and they'd fill out which color tint they wanted, the yellow or the red for the day or night respectively. And then we'd send them back to them once they were tinted and if they had confirmed that they'd already paid. And it was really cool. It was like an operation in my garage from September until May of 2017 to 2018. And as far as, I guess this is sort of how the business started. When did it really become a thing? I think when it started to become a thing, so to speak, something that was potentially taking off, was when a customer had said, hey, why don't you just offer some fixed styles? Why don't you give us that option rather than us having to send our own frame? And that's when I realized this has to be a brand. This can't just be a custom tinting service. There's something here. And then I decided the name Ra because it's the Egyptian sun god, and optics, the science that studies light. So, basically Ra Optics means sunlight. And that's how the company started. And then it just grew from there with a few different influencers promoting us, like this guy, Luke Story, who I'd done the podcast with, this guy, Dr. Jack Kruse, who is this main authority figure in this space of light and mitochondria and health and wellness, who kind of got me into this space. He started sharing this with his audience. Eventually, Ben Greenfield picked up on it because he heard me on a podcast and I connected with him. And that definitely brought us out to a bigger audience. So that's really that's the whole story. That takes up to 2018, which is still years ago. But yeah, I appreciate you asking, man.
Yeah, man, that's a great story. I could tell you're excited about the company and how it started and the purpose that you have behind it. It's obviously something that you live and breathe, which is huge. If you're going to put in the time, energy, occasional points of suffering to do a startup, you have to have a pretty strong drive of, not to make it cliched, of why, right? The classic why of what you're doing. Yeah. When you look at this industry, and I guess, can we call it like blue blocking light product lines?
Sure.
Can we just call it? I doubt, I know you're not old enough to remember, but I'm sure you know of it. Like I remember the old blue blockers, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day. I don't know if that was like the 90s and they had the catchy jingle, and it was kind of funny that people wear the old school blue blockers as kind of a joke, but I feel like it kind of started a little bit back then. How would you say like the arc of this particular product category, like, people like Ben Greenfield, I can kind of put into like a little bit of the biohacker community, which is early adopters for many pieces of technology. But where do you think this is now? Are you nearing mass adoption? I want to touch on the partnership with Aura. That's huge, right? That's a big deal. But like, where do you think we are right now in that cycle?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that we have not reached a mass market awareness yet, but there's a couple. We have to distinguish blue blockers. I'm glad you mentioned the blue blocker sunglasses. So blue blocker sunglasses were a type of sunglass that was particularly successful, and their kind of unique pitch was that they're sunglasses, but they particularly reduce blue light in addition to violet and ultraviolet light. And the idea there being that violet and ultraviolet light in particular is high energy. It can be damaging if you get excess amounts. So that's something that pretty much all sunglasses filter out. except maybe some really cheap sunglasses that don't really work. But the blue light is also pretty high energy, and it's in the visible range. So it causes a large portion of the visual discomfort, glare, and brightness that people can experience when they're out in the sun. So the idea of blue blockers, they were, as I recall, very like brownish orange, like a deep orange brown lens that's very much shaded. And so, yeah, the idea was that it would just give you a really nice experience of the world, because you're not just cutting out the ultraviolet, you're also cutting out the other shorter wavelengths of light. And there is actually something to that. I mean, people could use our lenses as sunglasses if they want to. We don't generally recommend sunglasses as a concept. But so anyway, to make this a little more brief. So sunglasses are not, that's like blue blocker sunglasses. They're almost a completely different product. They are, because they're marketed for people protecting sunlight. So those are never intended for or made for artificial light, right? So that's one. Now then, more recently, there's the development of blue light protection eyewear for artificial light sources like screens, like LEDs, and so on, primarily from a mainstream perspective, primarily for screens, because people are staring at screens. There's high energy blue light. It's interesting. There was a study that came out recently that basically it was an analysis of multiple other studies which was actually pretty cool that they did this. They organized all the other studies that have been done on blue light, and they actually reviewed them. Sadly, that they would spend so much time without really doing a better job of controlling for their variables. But more than half of the products used in the studies they analyzed were clear lens blue light blocking glasses. And so I want to talk about those. So that's like when you talk, there's the sunglasses. So we'll put those aside because that's not really what we're dealing with. There are blue light blocking glasses today, which are clear lenses, which are the main product that people are currently purchasing. So the number one thing you'll get if you get blue light glasses or blue blockers on Amazon or from any major optical store or any local independent optician even, they offer blue light glasses. Usually it's in the form of a coating that they add to your prescription. And this coating in the industry is called a UV 420 coating because it blocks ultraviolet light and it blocks blue and indigo light up to 420 nanometers. The issue is that the LEDs that are the basis of all modern lighting, screens and general lighting, emit the peak of their blue light at 455 nanometers. So there's a peak which ranges from around 430 to around 480, more or less, or even 435 to 480, something like that. But the peak is centered at 455 nanometers. So point is, if you have that peak and it goes down to 430, 435, there's some blue light emission at that wavelength range. There's none at 420 nanometers. So if you have a lens that blocks all the blue light below 420 nanometers, and then by the time you get to 430, it's blocking, less than 10%, less than 20% for the most part. And by the time you get to 450, the core of that spike, it's blocking zero. I mean, 0.1, 0.2, 1% maximum. Some maybe 2%, but again, virtually nothing. We're talking out of 100, right? These lenses, the point is they don't block the light coming from screens. They block blue light from the sun, but that's not what we're concerned with, as I was just sharing. We don't believe in my world that sunglasses are something people should wear every day. It's something you should wear in extreme circumstances, very bright lighting conditions, if you feel the need. A lot of people, the light experts I work with, light doctor I work with, never wear sunglasses. When he's skiing on a boat, I never do either. When I'm on a boat, I like the light reflection. It makes me sleep well. It makes me feel good. If it's too bright, I'll wear some kind of protection. But so we have to distinguish. So there's the sunglasses out the window now. There's the blue light glasses, the clear lens blue light glasses is how we distinguish, which effectively don't work. But that's like 95%. I don't actually have the exact numbers, but just an estimate is about 90 to 95% of all the products that are sold on the market. Why? Not that me and my company and the other company selling the colored lenses that actually block more of the light are so small or something like this. No, it's just that the clear lenses have been picked up by Warby Parker, by Zenni Optical, by Glasses USA, every major online glasses retail, and every major lens crafters. Some like all the offline, even physical retail shops, they'll add this blue light coating. So just by sheer volume, because they've added the blue light coating to practically everyone's glasses now for a ridiculous, $250 upcharge because it doesn't even do anything. That's basically what's happening. So that, I would say, has reached mainstream adoption or very close to it. Like that is mass market adoption. The clear lens blue light glasses, they're there. Anybody you talk to about blue light glasses, almost anybody knows about it. Okay, now the colored lenses that actually block the meaningful blue light. So when you actually block that blue light in that range that comes off screens and LEDs, what happens is that if you have enough pigment in the lens to absorb that light, it actually causes the lens to have a color. The pigment causes the color because the pigment's absorbing light. So you could say the pigment causes the color or the absorption of light causes the color. It's like saying the same thing. So basically and this is in the case of these yellow lenses for those watching this, these yellow lenses are basically yellow because what's coming in one side isn't being fully transmitted through the other side. So like this is me, if you're looking at the video, I don't know if the video is going to be there. This is me without blue light, and this is me with blue light. So it changes the color. But again, in order to remove, let me put it this way. The blue light that causes the issues like retinal damage and melatonin suppression, which aren't things we visually see happening. We might feel them a little bit, but we don't see them because they're non-visual effects, is the same blue light. That's why we call it blue light. It's the wavelengths of light that are in the range that we would see as the color blue for the most part. So anyway, that is what we're doing. And so the clear or the colored lenses that actually block blue light, I would just call them real blue light protection eyewear, is not near mainstream or not in mainstream adoption. I would say it's getting there. We have, from my perspective as one of the leading companies in the space, we had a partnership with Aura, which is originally a very niche biohacking company that's now, I think you could say, mainstream effectively, because they've had their products on every NBA player around the pandemic in order to help test their body temps to see if they were, potentially infected before they might have felt any symptoms. And so, that's gone pretty mainstream. So we had a partnership with them last summer, which was just a simple referral program. So it was like a great incentive. If you're an Aura member, hey, refer a friend, buy an Aura ring to buy a ring. And then we'll give you, as the referrer, if your friend purchases, we'll give you a free pair of raw optics. And so, of course, many people were incentivized in a way that they wouldn't previously have been to actually go out and refer a friend. And that's great for Aura. It was great for us. We sold them the glasses and they gifted them out. And it was amazing. One of the coolest things was the feedback we got from the customers. Many people who didn't expect any results or were skeptical, but they took it because it was a free gift, ended up leaving reviews saying things like, I didn't believe the hype. I saw that you could, people said they slept better the first night. I didn't believe it, but I wanted to try it. I wore the glasses. I proceeded to have the best night's sleep I had in months. Believe the hype. They live up to it. That's like almost exact words of it's hard to forget. It was really cool. And then there was people who's like literally had chronic sleep issues for years. One woman said she thought it was her aging in menopause, and she realized when she wore the glasses, her sleep got so much better. It wasn't aging in menopause. She looked back on her life and saw that it was just the increasing screen time over the last 10 to 20 years. And she was so grateful. And it was really awesome. But just to close the loop of the mainstream adoption, I think we're getting there with things like the partnership with Aura, with people like Ben Greenfield, who's getting more and more popular in public, talking about blue light glasses. And lastly, I would add that we have many top celebrities and athletes around the world using our products. So, for example, this is just, I don't even know what to make of this. I think it's serendipity and an amazing coincidence, like divine in some respects. But I was in Norway 6 years ago, and this was 2018, so almost 6 years ago, so 5 years ago in the summer. And I met a young guy named Erling Haaland, who is a young Norwegian soccer player at the time. And, I just connected with him. I was actually meeting with friends of mine who were one friend who was like a kind of friend and personal trainer and health coach, you could say, for a lot of these young soccer players at this local club, and the highest top league in Norway. But it's not like the big leagues in Spain or England. It's, kind of like the equivalent to, second league in the United States. If you had like the main baseball league, then you have the second league below. I forget exactly what it's called, but you know what I mean? So anyway, but for the locals, it was still a big deal, right? Like this is their home team and whatnot. Anyway, this one particular player got traded to some bigger teams, and like over the years just kind of kept building up. And he got traded, last year, maybe you're familiar with him, but he got traded to Manchester City, and now he's one of the biggest players in the world. He broke the record for the most goals scored in a single season in the Premier League, which is not easy to do because it's the top league in
Amazing.
the world. And like, anyway, so this guy's really big and he's been using our glasses all along the way. Have they made him the player he is? Not necessarily, but I would definitely go as far as saying that having had exposure to the principles of what I call the light diet, so optimal health through, and deeper understanding of light and mitochondria, probably has definitely benefited his kind of catapult to success from a health standpoint. Getting light, it improves your physiology significantly. Knowing that it's not good to drink a bunch of alcohol, obviously, which a lot of players shockingly do. Knowing that you should block blue light at night to help with your recovery and repair, knowing that you can use things like red light therapy, and maybe arguably more important than everything else, which is what I referred to earlier on, the importance of meditation, which I didn't instill in him. It was actually a friend of mine who I was meeting in Norway who shared this information with Arling. I believe he was one of the first people, if not the first. And he also is a guy who shared this information with me. Really great guy. He's a fitness trainer and just a really, really intelligent person. But anyway, that is where the products are. So I think mass market adoption is very close.
One of the things that I've thought about these products is I've had the opportunity to use them, and I like them. I use the evening ones. I don't have the daytime ones yet. I think there's a really big opportunity for the fitness profession, not just the practitioners, the coaches, the trainers, but also like health clubs and gyms as well to have these in, because it's, as this industry starts to find its way into like the larger wellness paradigm, right? It's like fitness is kind of finding its way right now. It's really important that we talk about overall health and wellness. And this is a really simple tool. Like, it's a one time, I look at it as a way as like, and people can use the workout platform too. It's like, go, if you're training and go there, you can have access to, products like Aura, or, you can build a recommendation. But I think as like a starter kit, like if I was still running a gym and coaching people in the world of fitness, I would say, coming in, hey, this is your starter package, right? We're going to talk about your sleep. I want to start tracking with a wearable. Like, you have these opportunities and these new tools to give your clients that just offer more value in more ways where you can touch them outside that 1 hour or 3 hours a week that they come into your gym. And that's a really, it's a really powerful thing. I mean, if people want to get involved, this is, I know we kind of have to wrap up here in a minute, but if people want to get involved in what you're doing and they are in this field, like what are some of the ways that they can be involved in raw optics?
Yeah. When you say involvement, by the way, I'll just say I can go a little bit longer if you want to go a little bit longer. So I sent you a message in the chat. But anyway, so yeah, if we want to continue a little bit more, I'm happy to, because I know I've kind of answered some questions pretty thoroughly. Maybe there's some other stuff you wanted to touch, but anyway, as far as getting involved, what are you referring to? Like
if they want to sell it, I mean, is there ways to do like,
I see. Yeah, of course. Well, we have a lot of different opportunities. So, for example, the classic simple partnership that we run with many people is a simple educational sort of affiliate model. So, where if somebody has an audience and they want to promote, we can give them a unique discount. And I don't just say promote; I should say educate and spread the message, because the only way anybody's ever going to sell our products is by educating. So it's really cool, and I'll touch on that in a second. But basically, people can share a discount code with their audience and then get commissions for their sales, right? And that's a really great model, because then it's just like, if you sell, then you get paid. Great, it works out. If you have a really engaged audience and you're sharing valuable content, then you'll make some good money. So that's a really great. And it's not like a whole MLM thing or this or that. No, it's just we sign people up, we vet people who we trust, and that's it. We don't just accept anybody who applies. So basically, that's one thing people can do. And then if that's successful, then we can look at all sorts of deeper ways of collaborating. Not to say that that's not deep, it can be, but other ways of collaborating, I should say, that are maybe more involved. Yeah, all kinds of frame collaborations. We can do we're doing some really cool custom branded frames with different influencers right now who have been really successful. And they're like, cool. Hey, I'd love to have my own frame. So there's all sorts of cool stuff we can get into. And that's with individuals, with companies, brands, with well, kind of there's not really a clear line between individuals and companies in this world today. You could be a coach and have your own coaching company and so on. And
True.
then you got to have a studio, right? Or a gym. But so anyway, people with gyms or studios or trainers, they can actually, if they wanted to retail our products, people can retail our products. So they could have a little display case and something we've been getting into more recently, the more brick and mortar physical retail as opposed to the e-commerce, which is what we've been focused on until now and continuing to be focused on primarily. But anyway, this is something because people ask us about it. So we kind of cater to what people
Sure.
ask for, right? So this is a great opportunity. If anybody wants to get in touch, they can email us partners@roptics.com. That's a great angle is actually retailing these products because that offers people more margins. Obviously, they have to make the sale, but we'll buy back people's untouched inventory if they don't sell it. Like we're not really
Oh,
worried.
that's great.
I mean, at least I say that now. If somebody listens to this down the road, it might not apply in the same way, but like we know we know the products will sell. They work. So right, like it's fine. We're cool with anything. We just want to get the information out. What I wanted to share about the products, and I appreciate you saying it's a great tool, is one of the quotes that really inspired me in this process. I didn't hear it before starting the company, but I heard it or I read it 1 or 2 years into the company, and it just clarified for me why I was doing what I was doing and still am to a great extent. And it's from this I guess you could call him a scientist, architect, and systems theorist and so on named Buckminster Fuller, who's very, very well known in his time. Anyway, and there's actually an isotope or a form of carbon named after him called Buckminster Fullerene, like diamonds and graphene. And there's this one. But anyway, he had this amazing quote, which basically said, paraphrasing here, if you want to get people to understand something, don't bother just trying to teach them. It never works, he says pretty assertively. He says, instead, give them a tool, the use of which leads to new ways of thinking. So for me, that encompasses everything we're doing as a company. So yes, we're selling products, but the only way someone's going to buy our product anyway is if they understand why it's important and why it works. Otherwise, they're not going to spend $164 on a pair of glasses with color lenses. They'd be like, what? Unless they understand what it is and why it works. And so if we've gotten somebody to that point where they're going to make a purchase, we've also gotten them to the point where they understand blue light and circadian rhythms to some extent. Now, in other cases, like the Aura partnership where they got them as free gifts, people didn't understand it, but that's fine too, because the product works because it's based on science. And it just was so cool to have this opportunity to work with Aura. And we're probably going to do something like that again in the future, maybe even more in-depth kind of work. But anyhow, that all is to be seen. But anyway, the cool thing is that not only do we have our customers who are kind of like, you could make a case before the Aura partnership that we ran that most of our customers are in an echo chamber of being a biohacker, and they're placeboing their way into having an effect because they're like, this is a big deal and it's going to help me, and then they get the effects. And I believe in the placebo effect. I mean, it's not a matter of belief, it's proven fact. And they literally, in drug studies, they have to control for the placebo effect. They have to actually change the numbers to control for the fact that a huge amount of people who didn't get the treatment are going to appear as if they got some form of treatment because they think they did, right? And they have to find the difference between that and then the other group, and that's the effects of the drug. But anyway, so otherwise it might look like the drug didn't do as much as it maybe did. Anyway, so we now had this other group of people, which was quite a large volume, like a huge amount of volume, even relative to our own quarterly sales. It was like big because Aura is huge. And so they gave us this cohort, which was largely skeptical. I mean, you could say they wear Aura rings, so they're open, health, and wellness, but there's a lot of people who wear Aura rings who are just like your regular everyday person who doesn't even necessarily eat healthy, right? But they, and based on the reviews, we know people were skeptical, but they still worked, right? So you don't even have to explain people the information. Like, although that's what we need to do to make a sale to most customers, they have to get to that level of understanding. Even if they just get the product in their hands because a friend gives it to them, they start, as long as they just use it the way we tell them to, and they start sleeping better and feeling better, it works. So it's really, really cool. And it's just, again, I don't even like to make it about products. Like, I've had many questions. Like, I believe now more and more studying inner light and how we can modify our health and wellness and everything with our mind, that we don't even need products to be healthy. And that's a bit of an odd thing to say as a guy who runs a product company, but like that we can actually all generate health and wellness internally through things like meditation. That might sound a bit far out there for people, including myself a few years ago, who are so attached to the idea that you need a certain diet and you need a certain product and you need all this stuff. If people go, if you know, a great guy to get on your show at some point, if it would work out, would be Dr. Joe Dispenza, who's less in the fitness world, more in the world of mindset, but the science of meditation. They just published a landmark study with one of the top epigenetic researchers in the world out of UC San Diego, where they were studying the blood of some of the people who participate at their week-long retreats. And I've been to like 10 of their week-long retreats because they're so awesome. And the changes that happen in people's physiology just from meditating are crazy. And they're measuring it because they were seeing people getting out of wheelchairs. They're like, we need to measure this. What is happening? Like, we're causing spontaneous remissions. Or the whole idea is spontaneous because they don't know what causes it. Well, they're figuring out what causes people to heal in instants from energy or changes in their physiology or whatever it is. They don't know exactly the mechanisms right now. They're finding all these really cool metabolites and proteins that are in the blood of people after a week of meditation that are significantly elevated. Now, the reason I'm sharing that is because Dr. Joe Dispenza, for example, he'll share sentiments and thoughts and ideas such as that people start healing when they actually start training their body to feel whole, rather than, most people, we train our bodies to be addicted to judgment and hatred and guilt and pity and frustration. But when people actually start training their body for different emotions, like to be happy and open and joyful and forgiving, it's like going up steps. I thought of this analogy yesterday. It takes effort to get to the next step, but you've gotten to the next step and you've got up. If you don't want to go up, you don't have to take a step. But if you want to go up, you have to exert the effort required to take the step, and then you get up and you can take a bunch of steps and you end up higher. And that's basically the way I look at like trading lower emotions for greater emotions. So anyway, I've come to believe personally, and this is my own greatest area of fascination now, that we can actually transform our own health with our mind and our thoughts. And said differently, that I believe that I kept myself sick by being addicted to being sick and being a victim. Like, it was actually an identity thing. I never took the time when I was trying to heal with all these diets. I didn't actually take the time to think of what I would do with my life if I were healed. Like, would I go out, like if I didn't have these symptoms, would I go out and play more basketball with my friends? Would I go out and bike? Like, would I go out and get a life? And for this reason, and I say this with a bit of disappointment, but the health and wellness industry is a lot more like a sickness industry. Even the alternative, there's a lot of obsessiveness about all of this stuff that isn't actually about health and wellness. I think more and more that health and wellness is the people out on a Saturday hiking up a mountain. That's health and wellness. They're just not obsessing about what they're eating, organic, gluten-free. They're just living a healthy life. I'm not saying that the health and wellness stuff isn't valuable. Again, I run a company making products that are scientifically proven to help people sleep better. But I want to just add that perspective whenever somebody listens to me. I never want anybody to walk away thinking from a podcast, oh shit, blue light's killing me, I'm going to die. It's like, you're going to be fine, first of all. You're very strong and resilient. I believe more than anything in the resiliency and the internal capability of the body to heal, which is where we started. And it's a great place to kind of sort of maybe wrap up with another question or two if you want to get in any more detail here or in some other area. But this idea that when I tried these elimination diets and I wasn't really feeling much better, I was actually feeling worse. And I didn't know then, I didn't even have the knowledge to ask a greater question at that time, or at least this particular question. But having learned about light and mitochondria and energy, and that there's so much more to physiology than just food and calories out, and you are what you eat, that there's so much more to how our body actually processes food and how our body functions in general. And has a lot more to do with energy and electricity and all these things. I've gotten really interested in particular, seeing these miraculous spontaneous remissions from cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease, all kinds of crazy stuff, autoimmune diseases in this meditation community at these retreats of Dr. Joe Dispenza. I've really started to ask the question, like, what is this force that causes us to heal? And like, do you even need to do a ridiculously strict elimination diet for 2 years for your gut to heal? Or could you just either strengthen or support the force that causes us to heal, or better said, get out of its way? That's the problem, is that in my experience and view is we're just in the way of that force. Like our choices to, this is like really in my view, really important for people to know, and myself, this is probably the most important thing I ever learned in my life. Like the choices that we make to be angry, and I'm not saying I'm perfect. I do this sometimes every day. I'll react about things, but the choices we make to be angry, to be mean, to be unkind, to be hateful, frustrated, resentful, impatient, all of these emotions that we choose. And again, I'm not exempt from this. I do this too. Choosing to be a victim, choosing to be stressed, choosing to see limited possibility as opposed to unlimited possibility. As Dr. Joe Dispenza would say, choosing to believe more in our past than in our future, and to tell the story of the past more than the story of the future. I think more and more that this has some of the biggest consequences on our health, because otherwise, like the universe is just energy, right? There's energy all within us and all around us, and it wants to move. I've actually come to believe that we actually stop the flow of this energy, or significantly hinder the flow of the energy that causes us to be alive, through our own thoughts, our own words, our own choices, what they called in the Bible sin, which means in Greek to miss the mark, to fall short of like a higher way of doing things. So both psychologically, in your actions and your words and your thoughts. Anyway, that's my perspective at this point.
I love it, man. Obviously, you're a deep thinker. I can tell that. We didn't have time to get into it, but you've gone on some literally long hikes and walks to present. Imagine just think, right, and figure shit out, which is a really nice benefit to having built your own business. And I appreciate it all. I mean, you mentioned a couple of things like, obviously there's rawoptics.com, there's partners at rawoptics.com. People want to go follow you or maybe reach out to you. Is there any place that you want them to go?
Yeah, of course. People can follow me on The Light Diet on Instagram. So I have this sort of brand and program I call The Light Diet, which is how we can improve our health with light. I'm in the process of refining it, making it more refined. Essentially, we have a blog on our website called An Introduction to the Light Diet. That's the name. And people could look that up. It might even be at rawoptics.com/the light diet. I think that redirects there. Okay. So anyway, people can check that out. People can message me on Instagram. I'll actually respond to pretty much all of my Instagram direct messages. So if somebody wants to get in touch with me, that's the best place to do it. If you don't have Instagram, you just got to make one. Email's the worst place to get in touch with me because I'll never respond. So basically, I mean, I might, but it'll take forever. So anyway, that's how people can get in touch. People should follow me at The Light Diet on Instagram, and they can and should follow raw_optics, our company page on Instagram as well, for more of the science of light. The Light Diet page is more of my own thoughts, my own travels, etc. So yeah, I would say that's about it.
Right on, man. Well, Matt, I really appreciate you spending some time with me, man. It's very interesting what you've done. And, at a relatively young age, you've done quite a bit.
Thank you.
And, obviously you have a big mission, and just keep trumping forward. And ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Maruca.
Thanks so much, Eric. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure to speak with you.